Diffusion, the international science radio show.
Yeah, my name is Vipul Agarwal. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Chemical Engineering up at UNSW in Sydney. So my background is in chemistry. I'm a trained chemist all over the years. Now I'm working more on polymer materials chemistry for a variety of applications. So my research focus on both producing or synthesizing new composite materials for coatings and foam sort of materials and applications, but also venture into biomedical side of things because I was funded by the NHMRC before, and also now going towards more into plastic recycling as well. So that's the new invention that we recently came up with that is getting a lot of traction. It's going towards commercialization as we speak.
Okay, that's really good. So should I begin with asking you about a definition of polymers, or should we go straight into the new project, or where would you like to start the conversation?
Wherever you are comfortable, I can start with what is a polymer. That's fine.
All right. So how about we go then with we have polymers all through our technology and our environment. What are they?
Okay, so polymers are, in a way, if you think about it, they are kind of like a building blocks. We know about proteins and DNA being and nucleic acids have been the building blocks, but I would also say, in addition to amino acids, I mean, polymers have become more or less like a building block for us. All our functionality and output has been improved substantially by the use of polymers. And like you said, we are surrounded by polymers. Including what we are wearing right now, to what we are using to listen to each other, talk to each other, communication, which is the insulation is plastic. It's everywhere. The polymers are used everywhere. And in a way, people think plastic as a polymer. That is true, but polymers are more than just plastics. So the carpets, the buttons on our shirts, they are plastic. The ropes that we use, they are plastic. So everything that we are surrounded by and use millions of times a day is all made of different sort of polymers.
And so we've got a problem in our world, I guess, where we keep on making them and then we don't have anything to do with the ones we don't use anymore.
Yes. So there is a huge problem globally, which has become kind of like a challenge for humanity, if I can say that. Well, it is basically been said by United Nations as well. It's to do with the end of use plastic, right? So majority of the plastic that we use, if we go to the supermarket, we would use single-use plastics. So very good example of would be shopping bags or a wrapper for a biscuit, for example. So they're single-use, or a punnet that we use to buy strawberries or blueberries, that kind of stuff. So they're all single-use plastic. They currently do not get recycled. And there are a lot of reasons why. One of the simplest thing would be economical reasons, why it is not feasible economically to recycle them using the existing technologies. And that's the reason why they are not currently being used as in recycled material. They are not recycled substantially because it's not a cost-effective process. We have come up with a new technology which is cost-effective and can solve this problem.
And what is this solution?
Right. So, we in 2019, we came up with this. We invented this new technology, which we called an aqueous technology. Now, this should not be confused with the term which is used in industry. This is a completely new technology. It is predominantly water-based, and this is why we call it an aqueous technology. So what we do is a polymer to polymer recycling. We do not break it down into a building block called monomers. We recycle polymers straight to a polymer. Now, one might ask why and how is it different? So there are a lot of differences, right? So one is that we can recycle materials which cannot be recycled currently. So for example, soft plastics, like I said. So soft plastics is polyethylene, polypropylene. They cannot be recycled, but we can recycle them. The other thing is that currently commodity plastic like PET, which you use in our soft drink bottles and water bottles, They can only be recycled once or twice. They cannot be recycled multiple times. And there are a lot of scientific reasons behind why that is the case. One of the reasons is that using current methods, we break down the length of the polymer chain as we recycle them multiple times. So with the reduction of these polymer chains, this material then loses its intrinsic properties such that it cannot then be reused to make the value-added product. You can make a bench out of it, but you cannot make value-added product out of it, such as the water bottle again, right? And that's it. That is something we want to do. So we believe we have come up with a technology that can actually close the loop, where we retain the length of the polymer. So as we recycle multiple times, we have shown that we retain the length of the polymer. It does not break down, and hence it can be recycled way more number of times than currently existed. So that's another very big leap on the existing technologies. So some of the other advantages, for example, is if we take about mechanical recycling, which is the predominant way of how plastics gets recycled around the world, and this by I mean PET, which is like I said, it's a commodity plastic. It's the most valued plastic in the world in terms of that, because it's sold in the stock market as a commodity, or traded in the stock market as a commodity. So people are more interested in recycling PET, right? So the mechanical recycling method, it actually only works on clear bottles. If you have any color, then it cannot be used. So this method cannot be used, and it is easily contaminatable as well. So I'll give you an example. So if you take a water bottle, the rim and the cap is not PET. They are polypropylene. So when you're trying to recycle this clear water bottle to be reused again into making a new water bottle, you may have intrinsic contamination because of that polypropylene. So in our technology, what we have come up with is we can in situ, so during the process itself, we can isolate different plastics, different polymers. So we can remove the contamination of, say, polypropylene or polyethylene from PET, or different types of polyethylene. So this is even more complex, where we're talking about, say, low density polyethylene versus high density. We can separate even those in the process itself. So it cannot be achieved using any existing technology, but we can. And we have shown that we can do it at scale as well.
Right. That's amazing. So you can separate the plastics and you can keep the polymers long so that they keep their original properties, so that you can turn them back into what they started as, or something else with the same properties.
Yes. So we can use them for whatever new materials that you want to make. We don't have to burn them necessarily, or landfill them, or make park benches out of it. Not that that is a bad thing, but the whole goal that we try to approach this problem is actually closing the loop. What that means is, can we reduce the dependence and the need for virgin plastic, which is fossil fuel based? So if we cannot reduce the demand for fossil fuel, then we are actually not closing the loop on the plastic waste, because new and new plastic will keep coming into the market, and it will keep contaminating the environment. So so this is the challenge we put to ourselves. Can we use what we already have, use it for n number of times, so that we reduce the demand for crude oil-based plastic? And that's what we have developed now.
Fantastic. So this new process, does it use as much energy as producing plastic fresh, or is it less energy?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. So look, we cannot compete with virgin plastic. And I'll tell you why. The reason why we cannot is because they had a 70-year head start with us. So those processes are so well optimized at scale that the cost is very, very, very low. Now, if any technology has to compete with the pricing on day one, it's not going to be that feasible. However, having said that, we do not use any high temperatures, any high energy systems, and therefore the costings are not high compared to existing technologies. So we are comparable to virgin plastic. However, we are still above the cost for obvious reasons, because we have not built the whole build plan where it is all optimized such that the costs are the minimum. but it would be comparable based on our understanding to the virgin plastic.
Okay, so you can't be cheaper than new plastic, but you are quite competitive with other recycling techniques that aren't as effective.
Yes, so right now we believe that we are competitive to the existing plastic, but so again, we gave ourselves the challenge to be as close to virgin plastic as possible. However, as we learned from market research and our communication with industry, they are happy, and also public is happy to give additional cost on the material for recycled plastic, which is used in packaging. So people understand it's a problem. People understand it's a challenge, and they're happy to put a small amount of money towards the use of recycled material over virgin material.
Mm. And what's the timescale for this project to be commercialized and in use?
Yeah, so right now we conducted a pre-pilot with PET at a 40 kilogram scale in New South Wales, and that was successful. So now we are hoping to get some sort of federal funding to basically build a pilot plant, which is going to be 1,000 kilograms at the scale in a batch. And so the other thing is the soft plastic. So soft plastic is because they are relatively similar in terms of processing. They're not same, obviously. Relatively similar. We are very confident that we can scale it up to easily to pre-pilot in the pilot scale. It's all right now dependent on the funding from federal agencies and market, basically.
Right. So, I mean, this sounds enormous because it's the sort of thing where we don't have a way of getting rid of soft plastics anymore. We had a pretend way where we thought a company was processing it and they were just stockpiling it. And it's
Exactly.
all still here. And so we need a solution.
Yes, no, totally agree. So it's basically stockpiling that soft plastic is a massive safety hazard because they're basically crude oil. So they have a very high burning quotient. So they can burn really, really well. So it's a huge hazard for the community and the society in general, and also for the climate, right? So because if you burn it, you're going to release all the toxic gases and carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and accelerate more climate change. So you would want to have a process which can solve this problem. So it's all contingent on basically the support that we can get to take this technology to the next step.
Yes. Because
So the time scale you were talking about is not that long. So we estimate that within 3 to 5 years, we should be at the commercial scale. That's the estimation we have currently. So it's not that far because we have done a lot of work in-house already, demonstrating the capabilities at different scales and different complex materials and everything. So we have shown that we can use all sort of packaging material. So you talk about biscuit wrappers, you talk about shopping bags, bin liners. We mix them all together, different bottles. We mix them all together, recycle them, and we can recycle them. The other thing that we have invented from our technology is that we can actually make what is called pellets or pellet-like material, which is what the industry requires. So usually the way it works is when you're recycling something, a polymer, you get something like a powder or something. What you need to do at that point is you have to thermally extrude it and make small pellet-like material, which is then added to the extruder to make products that you want to make, right? So we have bypassed that process. So in our process itself, in the recycling process that we invented, we actually get pellet-like material at the end, and we can control the size of that pellet-like material as well. So it's a huge tunability, and we believe that that material can directly be then fed into extruders to make new products. So we have bypassed that need for a step, and that step is very highly energy intensive and also releases a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So we have overcome those challenges, and therefore the cost will be further reduced of our recycled material.
And how did you come to start this project? What was the inspiration for realizing that this was the path you could take?
Yeah, so this it's a good question. So, well, what was happening was we were trying to solve a problem with another invention that we had, which has been patented now. And while we were trying to solve that question and that challenge to ourselves, we thought while working on that problem that maybe this can be used for waste plastics. And that's how it all inspired. So from there, we tried a couple of experiments and it showed, yeah, it looks promising. We just have to spend a little bit more time, which we did. So it's been over 4 or 5 years now that we have been working on this. So yeah, we have come a long way.
So you were solving a previous problem.
We were solving another problem with another technology that we were working on at the time. And from there, this got inspired.
Right. So what you're telling me is that you're constantly inventing and designing all these different projects and technologies. That must be quite a pipeline that you put together there.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's research, it's fundamental academic research. So when you're trying to solve new things, you might be able to come up with ideas of new challenges.
Mm,
So good thing is because we work in multidisciplinary environment, so this invention of plastic recycling was done by myself and my colleague Per Zetterlund, who's an academic in the School of Chemical Engineering as well at UNSW. And so because we come from complementary background but different backgrounds and also work in very close synergy, we were able to recognize the potential of this and try to come up with experiments which will actually address this thing and show that we can actually use it for plastic. So it requires a teamwork there in that sense, and also different expertises coming together.
I'm just thinking to get across to people what the current situation is that you're solving. Because as you said, PET, even though that's a sort of a success, they don't turn it into a lot more than benches. You don't see a
Yeah,
lot
so
of other
no,
products.
so no, you don't. So like I said, so because you can only recycle it once or twice, and you are completely dependent on clear PET bottles.
Mm,
So what happens is as you reduce the chain lengths every time you recycle this PET, it loses its properties so that it cannot make that material again because it loses its viscosity. So for example, these are all technical terms, crystallinity, for example, and those parameters are important if you want to make the bottle again. And so the technology has to come up with a way to address those challenges where those properties are not lost, they're retained. And that's a massive challenge if you think about it fundamentally.
mm.
And this is why we believe our technology surpasses what is existing out there in the market currently.
So that's huge because I mean that seems to be the big thing is that we all were sold the idea of plastic recycling and then we discovered that it wasn't true, that the technologies were not in place and they weren't working and all we were getting were the plastic benches. But now you've got hope there that we can actually within 3 to 5 years, which is so quick, um, actually start recycling these plastics and therefore reduce the need for new plastic.
Absolutely. So we believe we are at this stage. I mean, obviously, it's contingent on the funding, that time scale. So as anything else, really. So realistically, yes, we should be there within that time frame if we get enough support. Yeah, but like I was saying before, we have actually shown with the real samples from all the waste from say pasta wrappers, for
Mm.
example, which you put in the red bin right now. So that's another thing that we wanted to do was can we actually take material which goes in the red bin and recycle them? So a couple of years back, I mean, I go to this science week every year. And
Mhm.
so one year I was talking about this plastic recycling to families and children. And everybody was like, yeah, no, we put our stuff in the yellow bin. We are very serious about this. All the stuff is cleaned and put in the yellow bin. And they were really surprised to know that they actually don't get recycled. They all go to
Yes.
landfill. Most of the stuff goes to landfill. And they were really disappointed. And they were like, what can we do about it? And I was like, look, the first thing we would like to do is in addition to what is going to the yellow bin, can we move or make a new bin, which
Mm.
will take stuff from the red bin and the yellow bin, and we'll recycle everything.
Well,
And
particularly if,
that's
sorry, go right ahead.
no, no,
Sorry.
no. No,
Okay.
so I was just saying that we would like to combine these and recycle
Mm.
all different types of plastics.
Yes, I mean that's the thing. So people think that when they put things in their yellow bin or whatever the color is for the region they're in, that it's going to be recycled because that's kind of the point. But most of
Yep.
it isn't. And the few bits that are
No,
tend to go into benches, and not a lot of benches, because few
no,
people
no.
build
So
plastic benches.
yes, exactly. So we need plastic benches, I suppose, that if we can think about it. But can we, obviously that can, we don't need so many benches that we can take all the waste that is out there and that we are producing. We are producing billions of pieces of plastic every year, and we are estimated to double the consumption of plastic every decade as an Australian. So we consume a lot of plastic, right? So we had to come up with a way to solve not only our problems, but also global problems. And economically, it makes a lot of sense, right? So we would have a new industry and we might become a global leader in waste recycling, right?
Mm,
A new, brand new industry where instead of exporting the waste, which government has put a ban on right now, we actually can become an importer eventually and
mm.
recycle everything here in this country and sell it out. So there's a huge potential for economic development for the country and for the local communities if this technology has to go forward.
It's so important. It's one of those things you almost feel like we should have, like, do we write to our local members to encourage them to accelerate the funding to your project?
If if we can, yeah, I mean, please contact your local members and the federal government. We recently got knocked back again
Oh no.
for this from the federal government. Unfortunately, I mean, it's a competitive process.
Yes, of
Somebody gets
course.
it, somebody don't, which we understand. But a good support would go a long way, definitely.
Mm. Sounds like we need to start a campaign because this is so important, as you say. So our on the one hand, we've got a system that's really not working, where it's going into most plastics go into landfill regardless of whether they're recyclable or not, and most are not. And we've got all these new plastics that are not only are they using up fossil fuel, so they're creating a demand, but they're turning into microplastics as they sort of age around the place before they go into landfill and even after they're in landfill in the ocean.
Yes,
And so
yes.
really we desperately need a genuine recycling of plastics so that we have less and less of them being produced and stored.
No, absolutely. Look, we didn't even touch based on the ecological damage
Mm,
that it has, and eventually human health, right? We still don't know what the implications on long-term microplastic accumulation in body has on humans.
mm,
And we consume a lot of microplastic. I was really surprised. There was a stats, if I'm not wrong, we consume around 5,000 um, small microplastics a day or a
mm.
month, something like that.
Yes.
And babies are even more vulnerable, right? So because they lick everything. So my
Yes.
baby is playing around on this carpet, and we believe that this is good, but they're all nylon based, right? They're
Yes.
microfibers. So they're consuming microfibers, water bottles, right? So we use water from water
Mm.
bottles in Australia a lot. They have microplastics apparently. So we
And the
consume
clothing.
microplastic and the clothing, of course.
Yeah.
And you would see that when you clean your washing machines, right? So they are all microplastics which are
Oh, the
getting
little
accumulated.
fibers.
Exactly,
Oh.
right? So we are not even talking about oceans yet and the food chain.
So we might really need to push for an alternative to plastics that do the same job but somehow don't cause microplastic problems. Is that possible?
It look potentially it is. So one of my colleagues, I was talking about this particular thing the other day and said a very good point. So he said, look, if you do the mathematics in terms of the amount of energy required to say make a paper bag
Mm,
or say a cloth bag versus a plastic, even though you reuse the cloth bag way more number of times than the plastic bag, it is still more energy intensive than the plastic bag.
yes.
So economic wise, it at the end of the day, it all comes down to who wants to spend the money on this, right? So nobody wants to spend money on packaging material or any of these things. So what they want to do is a quick, easy fix, which will solve their problem so they can carry their groceries, for example. And so they need a bag. And so cost effectively, it is cheaper to have a plastic bag than a cloth bag.
Yeah.
So that's what we are doing, right? So Alternates are there, but they're not as efficient and effective as the plastic bag. And that's the reason why plastics have become such a big commodity, right?
Yes.
Because they are so versatile and so good, right? They don't get wet. They have a good strength. They're chemical resistant. They're UV resistant to some extent at the start. There are a lot of benefits to it, right? Which we don't have with paper bags or cloth bags, for
Yeah.
example. So that's the reason why people are so used to and dependent on plastic. So alternatives are there, but they're not real alternatives, honestly speaking.
They're not good
So
enough.
the best, well, yes, cost effectively and the use wise, right? I mean, how often would you find your cloth bag to go grocery shopping? Would you remember it? Or
Yeah.
if you're going out and you come back on the way you want to go grocery shopping, you might not have your cloth bag.
Or
So
it ends up
when you
being
need
woven
something,
plastic. It ends up being a woven plastic bag anyway.
that is true. That is true. That's what happened with all the shopping bags we currently have, right?
Yeah.
So I think the easier one of the best ways to solve this problem right now is to come up with the best way to recycle this and be able to reuse it as many times as possible before we have to think about what to do next with it, right? So we obviously know there is a technology available that can remold it into a new material, and we can probably don't have to use it right at the start, but we can use it when we have recycled them enough times that we cannot recycle them eventually. And so then that can be used to remold it into something else. Right. So so I think the biggest way or the best way to solve this problem right now would be to come up with a way to recycle this material more and more number of times and reuse them.
Yeah, yeah. And then we have to do something about the microplastics though, because we're probably still going to get those.
Yes. So whatever is, look, whatever is in the environment is already there. But can we reduce the load which is going into the environment? And so if we can recycle them any number of times, then it won't end up in the landfill and hence won't end up as a microplastic in the oceans, for example.
Yes, yes. And of course, if we've got effective recycling, then all this waste becomes a resource instead of a problem.
Exactly. So, like I said, companies obviously contingent on the government's legislation on this. And also, I think majority of Australians are quite informed. And I'm happy, this is my true belief that most of them would be more than happy to contribute a little bit to be able to use and reuse the same waste plastic every time. So I think people are very aware in Australia at the very least. And so I believe it is easier for us to create an economy in Australia and then be able to actually expand it to a global market and become a leader in waste recycling in this country.
Amazing. Is there anything I haven't asked you about you'd like to talk about? Do you have any stories about your work or your life as a polymer scientist or?
Well, yeah, that's a difficult one to answer. I'm not exactly
I
sure
probably
what to
should have
say.
prepared you a little bit.
Yeah, that would have helped. No, so I mean, I've been very fortunate. I moved to Australia around 17 years back, and I've been very, very fortunate to be able to experience a lot of different industries as a chemist. So I worked at the chocolate factory. I worked with the Department of Health as a physicist. So there is a lot of experiences that I managed to get, which was very, very lucky for me. So one of the other things that I'm really interested in is developing these implants for spinal cord regeneration. So if you have an injury on your spinal cord, and if it's a deep injury, anything below that point, all the motor functions are lost and sensory functions are lost. So it results in complete paralysis below that point in your body. So currently there are no clinical treatments for this problem. So my research is also looking into building these implants, which can then be put into the spinal cord of humans. And then that will potentially provide a small pulse of electric current to promote these cells, which after the damage, they don't grow again, to be able to grow again and make these connections to reverse this problem of paralysis in patients. So it's a big problem. It's a very big challenge. So that is something that my research is also looking into.
Amazing. That's quite a wide range of things that you're looking into there.
Yeah, so we've been, like I said, we've been very fortunate working on a lot of different challenges. So this is one good thing if you work on when you start with fundamental science. Because as you're creating things, you don't know where they can be used, but then you find out they can be used for a lot of different things. So because we work on, my research is a lot on polymer coatings and polymer foams and those sort of materials, these coatings they can be used as implants, like explained. But we're also working with the government to make materials for them, for intelligence community or defense communities, because these are coatings. We're also working with industry to make anti-fouling coatings for ships, for example, to solve their problem with fouling on recreational boats and
things.
global shipping. Exactly. So yeah, the applications are varied, and we have been able to touch base on quite a few of those over the years. So it is a fascinating journey.
So we have about 5 minutes of this session left because I'm using the free version of Zoom. So the question is, all right, so Vipul, you were telling me that you've been working on a polymer implant for spinal cord injuries. Can you tell me about that, please?
Yeah, so this has been funded by NHMRC initially. So we've been developing this polymer nanocomposite implant. So basically, polymer nanocomposites are where you have a polymer and some sort of a filler which will impart different properties. So the premise for this implant is that there has been some preclinical evidence to demonstrate that if you apply a small amount of electric current into the neurons which are damaged after the spinal cord injury, it can promote their regeneration. And that is predominantly the only way it has been shown to result in some sort of or some extent of regeneration of these damaged neurons. So our goal in my research is to develop two types of implants. One is kind of like a coating or a film, which can be easily folded and wrapped around, say a spinal cord. The other one is to make three-dimensional foams, which can then be just inserted into the injury site. And then we can remotely apply the electric current, kind of like you can imagine it like a pacemaker, where it imparts a small pulse of electricity to the heart muscle. It's a similar sort of principle, but to the spinal cord. And then the idea is that it will eventually start promoting the neuronal growth of these damaged neurons and build the connections which are damaged and thereby reverse the paralysis that is incurred to the patient.
Right, right. And so what part does the polymer play in that implant?
Yeah, so the polymer it's kind of like a binder. So you can't put a naked electrode in the body for a lot of different reasons. This is the reason why cochlear implants use PDMS, that kind of stuff. So there are different sort of polymers being used in different implants. And electrodes, but because they're metal based, they have their own intrinsic problems, including with toxicity over time. And so in our work, we get away from metal-based implants and we use fillers, which are carbon-based. But the polymers, primary role of the polymer is like a binder, where it provides the flexibility, but also enable us to easily implant. So it's biocompatible polymer that can be implanted into the body.
And how did you get started on this type of project? You work on a wide variety of things.
Yeah, so I did a little bit of work during my PhD in collaboration with one of my colleagues on similar sort of project. But I have a lot of background in polymer materials chemistry. And during my PhD, I was building kind of like bandages for burn injuries. And during my postdoc, I extended that kind of research towards bone regeneration. So I had quite a bit of background in terms of polymer composites for different implantable materials for different injury models. So it was kind of like kind of strategic in that sense to extend it to, say, a neuronal injury.
Right. And has this implant got into clinical trials?
No, so I mean, as you might appreciate, it takes a long time for any of the biological material to reach to clinical trials. So this was funded by the NHMRC in terms of early career fellowship, which just concluded a couple of years back. So we have been very successful in showing that this implant it works really, really well. It is biocompatible. It can help these stem cells, kind of neuronal, kind of like stem cells, to differentiate into specific types of cells, which are kind of neurons, which are required. So if you want to use them as an implantable material, so it can serve two purposes. One is that it can intrinsically promote the regeneration of damaged neurons, but it can also be used as a conduit to deliver stem cells, which can then be inside the body, can be differentiated into neurons to promote that regeneration aspect of the injury site. So we've been able to show that we can take these primary neuronal stem cell like cells and then differentiate them specifically into neurons with kind of like the axons, which are the network making sites of these neurons. We were able to show that they can actually form with the electric impulse that we give them. So they're very responsive on these implants. So next level is to get into the animal trials. But there are still few questions to be answered with these implants before we can get into the animal trials. And then eventually, if it's successful, go towards the human trials.
Right. It's such a long road. So you've been able to show that the implant can stimulate the nerve cells so that they build their networks and that the signals can start flowing again from, well, I guess from the brain and the body rather than just from the electrical stimulator. Is that right? So
Yeah, so
they conduct again.
yeah, so we have only shown them in the tissue culture stage. So we have not done it in the animal trials. One of the problems, well, it's not a problem, but it's very difficult to get ethics approval for these sort of injuries
Mm,
because the animal becomes completely paralyzed.
yeah,
So they are completely non-functional. So it's also very expensive. So within the scope of the funding at that point, we could only demonstrate that in the tissue culture scenario, it actually works really, really well. It does the functions that we set out ourselves to achieve. So we can stimulate the cells. They can be used as conduits to deliver cells. And also we can differentiate cells into neurons and get those projections, the external outgrowth that we need for eventual neuron regeneration to happen.
right. That's still quite amazing. And as you say, it's a long road. There's all these steps to happen, and but they are going to happen. So they're lined up to get to the animal studies next.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, this has to be funded, and these
Of
experiments are quite
course.
expensive. So, pending the funding, yes, that's the next stage is to do a little bit more optimization in terms of
Mm,
the cell lines, the primary cells, and then eventually do the animal trials.
right. So that's two different uses for this biocompatible polymer that you've told me about. Are there other uses?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been using these polymer coatings for a range of different things. One of the things that we're working with one of our industry partners in terms of anti-fouling coatings. So in the commercial shipping, there is a problem of barnacles which are sticking to the hull of the ships. And this is why if anybody look at those ships, commercial ships, you will see a big red line, red paint, more than half the length from the bottom. Um, and the reason for that is the anti-fouling paint. So commercially right now, those paints can only last for a very short period of time. So say we're talking about in the span of few months. And then those paints have a lot of copper, which gives the color, red color that you see on those paints. But there is no way to control the release of that copper. Now, that copper is a very effective anti-fouling agent. So it inhibits the attachment of these barnacles and crustaceans on the metal surface. But they're also very toxic to the marine life because if you release them at very high concentration, they kill everything. So we set out with our collaborators, which is the Sydney-based company, to develop these paints, which can be very controlled and they can be long-lasting. So they do both purpose. They're very cost effective in that sense because you don't have to apply them again and again. The other thing is because they release in a very controlled way these antifouling species from these paints, they are very environmentally friendly, relatively speaking, to the commercial paints which are available right now. So that is one of the other applications we are working on. But we also work on antimicrobial coatings. Say if you want to coat a bed, for example, a hospital bed or walls, or say an implantable material, we can coat those materials. We can incorporate a lot of different types of compounds. So if you want to add the antibiotics, we can do that. Or a peptide or protein, we can incorporate those in these coatings and they can be released. So we have shown that they work as well. We are also trying to make stealth coatings out of this for defense applications, for remote detection and those kind of applications.
Mm. So there's a lot there. So you can control the release of substances. That's huge.
Yep.
And as you say, there's all those medical applications as well as at sea.
Yes, so the range is quite broad. And so we have been able to optimize different fundamental properties of these materials. So one of the inventions we had was that we can actually control. So these are, like I said, like explained before, these are nanocomposites. So they have polymer and some sort of a filler. So it is very difficult to achieve any sort of control how this filler is then arranged or distributed within polymer matrices. So we used water-based polymerization approaches. So they are called emulsion-based approaches, where we have reported that we can precisely control how these fillers get distributed around polymer particles, both in the colloidal state in a solution, as well as when the coating has formed. And we recently had a breakthrough where we can actually now control multiple fillers, not just one filler, but multiple filler within these composites. So that has huge implications now. So we are exploring it for, say, biosensor applications. So if you can imagine, you can have a sensor which can only sense once. So for example, your COVID kit, it only works once. But could there be a strategy where we can reactivate that sensor so the same kit can be used multiple times? And so we are developing those sort of strategies using this sort of fundamental control over the composites, how we put them together, and then show them in different applications.
That is quite amazing because there's so much waste involved with COVID-19 tests, but they're totally essential. And so all the plastic just builds up, like the
Yep.
masks. And if we could
Yeah,
reuse
exactly.
them,
No, definitely. So I mean, for us, we work on plastic recycling as well as this sort of thing. So we can actually use multiple components of the same research and look at different aspects from recycling to manufacturing
Mm,
of
mm.
these new species and new sensors and materials.
And would you be able to use these types of fillers and polymers in 3D printing type of technology to build up some of these devices, or is that a bit too crude for what you're doing?
No, no. So with our specific formulations, we have not explored too much 3D printing, but we have worked with our collaborators from overseas where we have done 3D bioprinting. So we have used similar sort of fillers in different polymer matrices. And because this is for bioprinting application, they have to be biocompatible, and you would want them to be biodegradable as well. So we've used those sort of matrices and successfully shown that we can actually incorporate these fillers into these composites, but also we can 3D bioprint different conduits and then show them that they can be used for biological applications.
What sort of things were they bioprinting?
So there are different types of polymers we can use. So say, for example, natural alginate-based polymers or polyvinyl alcohol based polymers. We are doing some more work with carboxymethylcellulose, those kind of polymers. So mostly natural polymers, a little bit of synthetic, but mostly natural polymers. And one of the main applications we are looking at is towards nerve regeneration. So neuronal regeneration, like I was talking about in spinal
Yeah, yeah.
cord, but we're also looking at that central nervous system, but also peripheral nervous system. So that's additional work that we are doing with 3D bioprinted scaffolds.
Ah, so it's the scaffolds that you're bioprinting, or the your part.
Yes, I mean those materials are called scaffolds. It's just the terminology in different fields.
Yes, yes. Oh, I'm just trying to get it a little clear in my head what was happening with which things.
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
that's remarkable. So you're basically able to get this interface between the electronics and, or even just the mechanical, or the devices and the body with the polymers
Yeah.
and the pillars.
Yes, yes, and we've shown that we can use them for a range of applications,
Mm,
both in terms of biological applications, but also, say, sensing application. It's a similar sort of principle where we have shown that you can take similar sort of interfacial interactions in place, and then you can use a sensor. And if you stretch that material, which is like a film, if you stretch it, it reactivates the sensor again. So you can consume the sensor. It is like, for example, a COVID kit has been tested once. You can stretch it and it's reactivated again. You can do another test on it, that kind of thing.
amazing,
So,
amazing. I had the wrong
yeah,
idea. When you were saying that you could reactivate, I was thinking that, you'd have to um, apply another reagent or some more cells or something like that, but that you can just deform it and have it be reactivated is amazing.
yes, yes. So we don't have to do any treatment to the matrix. All we need to do is just stretch it or bend it. And that is enough to reactivate it for another run, another test that we want to do on the top.
Wow. And I suppose that one's got several years down the line as well.
Yeah, so we have shown that now we are doing a little bit more complicated work with multiple analytes in the real examples to show that we can use it for multiple disease models at once. So we can detect multiple diseases on the same platform and also then activate it whenever we like. So for example, say we are at a very early stage of a disease, so your biomarkers are not sufficient concentration to give you a test result. So what we can do by using this approach is, even if we have very low amount, but by activating it, by stretching this, say a sensor, we should be able to get a large surface area exposure, which will catalyze this reaction faster. And so hopefully even with low concentration, we should be able to get a response that we cannot otherwise. And so this can be used for very early detection as well as multiple detection of multiple diseases on the same platform.
Oh, I look forward to that.
Yeah,
That's so
so
much
that
better.
is that it is working quite well. Hopefully within this year we should be able to publish it and demonstrate it.
Fantastic. Well, that's very hopeful. These are all technologies that we really need, so it's very good to hear. And it sounds like you and your colleagues have a lot of irons in the fire.
Yes, definitely. I mean, that's the point of doing fundamental research, because it leads to a lot of different applied research examples. And we've been very fortunate to have collaborators from all different expertises around us that we can easily collaborate with. So that's a good ecosystem that we have in Australia and overseas, of course, with our overseas colleagues, to be able to try different new things.
Yes, and you mentioned some of the obstacles that come up sometimes. So there was the ethics, and I know that you have to get someone to go through and write a report on all the possible harms and what you're doing to mitigate them, and that has to be approved. Is that the process?
That is true. So we have to apply to ethics committee at the university with all the protocols established, and then they recommend any potential changes. It's just so that there should be no harm to the animal for no specific reason, and if we can reduce the need for animal, then we should do that. Obviously, so that's what we are persevering towards in our research as well.
Mm. And then you've got the issue of grants. And I think a lot of people don't quite understand that you can't just say, here's some very valuable research, and keep on getting paid to do it. That the university doesn't just pay you to keep doing your work. It's more complicated. So how does that work for your projects?
Yeah, so we are very dependent on funding. So we have few sources of funding from Commonwealth to a little bit of state funding and also industry funding. So there are a little bit of different avenues, but we still have very relatively speaking, very small amount of money for the number of academics working in the field. So there's a lot of people are doing great science, but the amount of money is floating around is not sufficient enough to support everybody. And so we are completely dependent on funding. So if there is no funding coming for some parts of the research, then we have to stop those and we have to let go of people. So that's a loss of talent and trained professionals. And then it becomes very, very problematic to restart something which has stopped completely. So it's a constant kind of like a survival thing that we have to seek from different agencies around Australia and also overseas.
And those agencies are pretty independent, so it's not like the public couldn't like write into their MPs or have petitions or anything like that. These agencies just sort of sit there and say yes or no, pretty much. Is that how it works?
Yeah, so it's I mean, most of the agencies go through what is called a peer review process, where other academics review the grants that we write for our research ideas and our research that we want to pursue, which is in some ways quite fair. But yeah, what we can do in general is we can request or push the federal government and the state government to allocate more resources towards research. And so it's all comes down to eventually the pool of money available that can be then distributed. So if there is only so much amount of money, it can only be distributed to so many people. But hopefully, if you have more pot of money, it can be then support more people outside of that small domain.
Right. And you need to apply to grants for both the federal and the state governments. Is that right?
Yes. So we have to apply to both federal, state, and also industry as well to get any support.
Wow. So that's something people need to consider, that there's all this amazing technology and amazing ideas and new knowledge. And if it doesn't get funded, it slows down or even stops, and you might not be able to go back to it for a long time or even at all.
Yeah, that is true. So there is a lot of talent being lost, unfortunately, because of the lack of funding and resources. So it is absolutely true. Once something is stopped, it is very difficult to reignite and restart it from that point on, and find the talent which can actually deliver that kind of work.
Yes, it seems to be one of those things that the politicians ignore because, like, we've got an election coming up at some point this year, and neither party is put out a statement on science research funding. And the previous election, they barely whispered about science. I try to cover it every election, and there seems to be less every election discussion of the issue because either there's an anti-intellectual position where they're against things like climate science that might affect big business, or they just don't seem to be interested. I think, was it a few years ago, I think the Labor Party wanted to fund medical research only, and not everything else, as if it wasn't interconnected. And even then, they just set up a fund. They didn't allocate money for research, they allocated money for an investment fund that might fund it in the future, which
Yeah.
is not quite the same thing.
No, it's not the same thing. And you touched on a very, very good point here. So one thing is science is very interrelated, right? So I was initially funded, for example, through NHMRC, so which is National Health and Medical Research Council, which is one of the two main agencies in Australia for research funding. And my research was to develop these implants for neural regeneration, the spinal cord, which I talked about at the start. Now, from that research, all of these new components and new research emerged, right? So that is the impact of funding fundamental research, which could have a long implication in a lot of different fields, including industry, right? So from plastic recycling to anti-fouling coatings to antimicrobial coatings, all these different things, it all came out of that fundamental research. If I would have not got that support, this probably would have not happened, right? So we need to, as a whole, as a society, need to understand what is the importance of doing research, which I think it improved a little bit during COVID. So that was the only, I think, good part of COVID, because people got to see that academics and research scientists actually do some work which has direct impact in their life. So that hopefully will continue over time. The other thing is, which you talked about, is it is true. So if I'm informed correctly, the research funding, the research allocation, money for research has not increased in the last N number of years. I don't even know how many, so I think more than 5 years. So yeah, almost a decade probably. So
Yes.
that has to change. If we have to be competitive internationally, we need to increase the amount of money that goes towards research, because it has a huge implications on our society and also on our economy. So it's not the only thing that it will keep us employed, but it will make a huge change for the whole broader society in general.
Yes, yes. I remember back 10 years ago when Tony Abbott was cutting CSIRO and other science funding by, I think, 20% of staff were going. So it's double decimation. He said, it's all right, don't panic because other countries will do the science if we don't. And of course, that's not taking account of the fact that all the scientists here working on local problems for Australia or even involving Australian biology and Australian environment will all have to move on to other jobs, some of them in Australia, some of them elsewhere. And so the work can't be taken up again, and they won't be doing the same work overseas. They're not instantly going to get another job in the US or the UK or France or wherever. So the work
Yeah.
won't get done elsewhere.
No, no. And also, I think it's a very naive way of appreciating what the impact of research is. Like I said, it's a direct impact on economy. Um, so, for example, this plastic recycling stuff, it can create a new economy in Australia and make it a global leader in waste recycling, right? That's a huge business. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars here at the start, because currently there is no commercial company which can recycle soft plastics. So if we can do it, everybody will have to come to us, right? So it's a huge oversight in terms of not appreciating the impact of research. And so the other thing I would like to highlight is what you were talking about as in Australian problems, right? So we are an island country, right? Everything has to be imported and shipped in our country. And Australia, most of it is surrounded by hot water, relatively warmer water, ocean water. So the ocean temperatures are warmer, which results in more fouling of commercial shipping. So if we can come up with a new technology to solve that problem of fouling on these commercial boats or ships, that will first create an economy for us. So it's a new source of funding and taxes for the government, but also it will help Australia get materials for cheaper, because then the companies, logistic companies, don't have to spend that much amount of money on fuels to push the ships to come to us, to this island, right? So there are huge benefits which goes beyond just the employment of staff, whether they get fired and they can get jobs somewhere else. I mean, that's just very small in this whole ecosystem.
I think so. It's one of those things where people I guess there's like it seemed like Tony Abbott and all the various Liberal prime ministers that came after him that didn't replenish the funding. It's like they saw mining for knowledge. Like they see science as like mining. You just dig stuff up and they imagine you can do that anywhere and it doesn't matter who does it. But of course, even for mining, if you don't mine it in Australia, then no money comes to Australia.
That is correct. That's absolutely bang on. That's what happened. I mean, we are learning this even now in the ecosystem, right? If you can't defend yourself, you can't trust on other people to help you defend yourself, you, right? So we have to be completely self-sufficient in every sense of the way. And that's why the funding support that we got from Australian government in terms of building the stealth coatings is an example in that direction. We have to be self-sustained first, and then we can use that knowledge and export it to get more revenue into this country.
Yes, and the other mining analogy, if you have to do that from the sort of liberal national perspective, is that you can't just mine anywhere in the world. You have to mine where the minerals are, which in this
That is
case
true.
is where the resources and the people are, where the ideas are and where the problems are, or it's not going to happen.
Yeah, that is so true. And yeah, and this gets overlooked quite easily. And I think one of the reasons is because we are not informed. The society is not informed the importance of research that they have and the implications they have in their daily lives. So the avenue that you have is perfect in that sense. So thank you very much for raising awareness for research to the general public. It's very important, these sort of events.
Oh, it is. It is. Thank you. Oh, look, I'd like to see if we can have, if sport is newsworthy every night on TV and every day on the radio, then why not science as well?
No, absolutely. I think there should be a section dedicated for, I think, 2 minutes on the morning radio, which I listen to every morning, talking about the new research that came out of Australia.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing. And I think people are becoming more and more aware, like I said, after COVID. So I think people are not averse to it anymore. They see that there is an impact, which they have in their daily life, and it can be really meaningful. Yeah, so our research at UNSW has come up with new technologies, working on both fundamental and applied side of research, in terms of different avenues which has direct impact on human society. So take, for example, from plastic recycling to implants for spinal cord injuries, and different types of paints and coatings for a range of applications from defense to logistics and shipping. So there is a huge importance of supporting and contributing fundamental research, and hopefully you would be able to see some of our research in your everyday shopping and in everyday life in the next few years.
I hope so. Well, Vipul, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Ian. It was great, wonderful, and awesome talking to you.
And that's all from me this time on Diffusion. Please remember to like and subscribe to help the algorithm show this interview to other people. Are you a scientist, artist, biohacker, or maker who'd like to be interviewed about your work? Would your company like to sponsor Diffusion? Send your contributions, opinions, helpful suggestions, and donations to science@diffusionradio.com or comment below and help the algorithm. I produce Diffusion Science Radio, a weekly science podcast which is broadcast around Australia on the Community Radio Network since 1998. Subscribe to the podcast on the Diffusion website at www.diffusionradio.com. That's www.diffusionradio.com, and check the website for links, photos, and videos about the latest show. And you can explore more than 1,300 previous episodes archived on diffusionradio.com, where the shows are labelled by keywords so you can focus in on the shows that you want to hear. Join my patrons at patreon.com/diffusionradio. Make a donation through paypal.me/Ian Woolf. Support Diffusion by buying from the Diffusion Science Etsy store. Catch people's eyes like flies. I have Hawaiian shirts, t-shirts, pullovers and mugs with many different Venus flytrap designs based on my photographs from the Carnivorous Plant Society's plant competition winners. Check out the shirts and other Venus flytrap designs at diffusionscience.etsy.com. I'm Ian Woolf. Join me inside your device of choice for more science wondering next week on Diffusion Science Radio.
Study science, because you will find in the study of science a richer, more rewarding life.